It's time to take another look at Stasis. It's been a few weeks since the final shape launched, and with it, we not only got the brand new prismatic subclass, but also the changes to Stasis that promise to improve the subclass, especially in areas that it was lacking, namely sustain and ad clear. All the changes look promising, but did they do enough to move the needle on the relevance of Stasis in the new Destiny sandbox? Is it worth using Stasis now? I'm going to try and give my thoughts on the new state of Stasis, and whether or not the changes delivered on what they promised, or maybe were meant for something else entirely. Hey everyone, I'm Rizeki, and welcome to my design analysis on the new state of Stasis in Destiny 2. As always, thanks so much for checking out the video. If you end up enjoying it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like on the video. I'll be making more like this all about the new meta topics in the coming weeks, so you'll definitely want to be notified when those videos drop. Also, I wanted to let everyone know that the channel is partnered with Advanced GG. If you haven't checked them out yet and are interested in some really great gaming supplements for focus, energy, or hydration, you're going to want to. Click the link in the video description and use code RIZEKI at checkout for 10% off your order. But with all that out of the way, let's talk about Stasis. I've made a number of videos covering Stasis over the past few months. If you haven't seen them, I highly recommend watching at least the original State of Stasis video so you could be caught up on why Stasis was in, well, a bad spot and what needed to be changed. I've left links to all of my Stasis videos in the description if you want to check them out. This video is going to have a different format from my previous State of videos, since I'm going to be focused on the changes that were made and whether they were good, bad, or just middle of the road. Let's start by quickly going over a list of the changes that we did receive. The new Frost Armor keyword, new fragments, reworked fragments, adjustments to harvest aspects, increased shatter damage, and various ability tweaks and balance adjustments. I'm going to jump straight into the biggest change we got, Frost Armor. Frost Armor is a new stasis buff that grants escalating amounts of damage resistance for each stack of Frost Armor you acquire. In PvE, each stack will provide you with about 4.5% DR. At a max of 5 stacks, you'll have a total of 22.5%, which can be increased with the Whisper of Rhyme fragment. Frost Armor, just like Woven Mail, will also have a short duration, after which you will lose your DR. Frost Armor promised to be one of the fixes to the sustain problem on Stasis, as well as a way to incorporate Stasis shards more into the gameplay loop of the subclass. The newly reworked harvest aspects will now give you a stack of Frost Armor when collecting a Stasis shard, and larger shards can give more stacks. The gameplay loop here is obvious. As long as you are generating shards and collecting them, you should be able to maintain a relatively high amount of damage resistance while using Stasis. I like this new direction, and it gives a small mini gameplay loop in addition to whatever overall build you're running. It helps to give Stasis a little extra identity as a subclass. But what does the gameplay loop matter if the reward isn't worth it? Is Frost Armor worth the effort? Is it an improvement from before? Originally, Stasis gave us a generic DR from a number of sources, typically through something like Whisper of Chains, which gave DR when sitting near frozen targets or stasis crystals, or through exotics like Renewal Grasps for when standing inside Duskfield grenades. The amount of DR that these sources provided was actually quite good, but had some shortcomings. The biggest issue was the consistency, where your DR was dependent on frozen targets and crystals, which could be broken, shattered, or killed pretty easily, sometimes even outside your control. For example, a teammate could easily destroy a crystal you needed. So although the DR was good, it was tough to keep up most of the time unless you were super aware of everything while playing. Frost Armor's biggest advantage is that it's a consistent source of DR. You're no longer dependent on deployables and enemies, but rather your own timer and your own ability to generate and collect shards. Even the average amount of DR you have is less with Frost Armor than it was before, but you will almost always have it applied to yourself. In my opinion, having 10% DR 90% of the time is better than 90% DR 10% of the time. Not that these are the actual numbers, but you get the idea. So you're probably thinking that I am 100% in the Frost Armor camp. But that's actually not true. After playing with Mono Stasis quite a bit, I've come to the conclusion that, well, nothing has changed. Sure, we have Frost Armor / DR up more often, but it's still the same thing as before. It's still just damage resistance, but now we've got a new fancy name and activation requirement. Whether the DR is generic like it was before the update, or named like it is now, it's still just DR. It makes me wonder why this change was made in the first place. The only thing I could think of is that it, well, just added a new subclass keyword and also gave a new function to stasis shards, but let's pin this for later, I'll be coming back to it. For now, let's talk about the other changes first. Our next major change is with fragments. We've gotten some entirely new ones, as well as a slew of old fragments that received new adjustments or were reworked entirely. Of course, since the generic DR was replaced with frost armor, a number of fragments were changed to adapt to this. Whisper of Chains, for example, no longer gives DR while next to frozen targets or crystals, and now gives you a chance to create stasis shards when defeating an enemy while you have frost armor. Whisper of Rime now increases your max frost armor stacks and increases their duration instead of providing a stasis overshield. Both of these lead into the new mini loop of creating shards to build frost armor, so I think they are hitting their mark there. Especially Whisper of Rime, since it greatly improves the performance of your frost armor. Pretty much all of the fragments, old and new, interact with your frost armor in some way, so it helps make the subclass feel more cohesive around this new keyword. I think overall the changes to Stasis Fragment has in fact helped to make things work together better and works to tighten up the subclass, whereas before it felt a little bit looser and less tightly knit together. Let's quickly talk about the Stasis Shatter Damage next. There really isn't much to say here, if I'm being honest. Shatter Damage was increased by 200%, making Stasis a lot more potent at killing enemies near crystals or frozen targets. This is a great change, since it does increase the ad clear potential of Stasis. In practice though, I don't feel that it has made a huge enough leap that I was expecting, especially on a class like Hunter, which never really prioritized Shatter Damage for most of its builds. Just like for Frost Armor, I think there is more than meets the eye about this change, so pin this one in the back of your mind too. We'll be getting back to it. I already mentioned the harvest aspects briefly, but I skipped over their other new effect. Each harvest aspect, in addition to granting frost armor on stasis shard pickup, will also grant you a small amount of health based on the size of the collected shard. Originally, I believe this was part of the Whisper of Rime fragment when below max health, but it's now rolled into our aspects. This is a nice change since it helps to open up a fragment slot, while at the same time giving room for Rime to be updated. So we have more sources of healing, right? Now Stasis has DR, more ad clear, and healing. Well, the healing here is still terrible. Each shard still only gives a small fraction of health back, and a single copy of an armor mod like Recuperation provides way more substantial healing. This kinda stinks, since I feel forced to allocate armor mod slots to healing when it should just be more accessible in the subclass itself. Stasis still feels like the only subclass missing a solid healing mechanic, and that really hurts its potential for sustain. I will say though, the combination of Whisper of Bonds with Recuperation is pretty good, since it's much easier to shatter targets now to generate orbs. I just wish the healing from Stasis Shards was increased, or maybe a fragment was changed or given to us that would improve this healing, much like Whisper of Rime now does for Frost Armor. Our last stop on the update train is abilities. Overall, the ability changes are great. Winter's Shroud feels much better now, especially with the addition of damage resistance when dodging. Silence and Squall feels amazing for ad control due to the changes to its AI and the damage tick improvements, and I have heard from every Titan player I know that Diamond Lances feel fantastic now. Every single ability change on Stasis was good, and helped to improve the feel of the subclass, as well as the overall killing potential. Stasis of course needed help in the ad clear department, so these are all welcome changes. But even with all the changes, both good and, well, meh, Stasis still feels forgotten. I couldn't shake the feeling that Stasis almost feels identical to before, albeit with some buffs to the gameplay feel and ad clear potential. The sustain is still garbage, and the killing power isn't strong enough to really warrant using it. At the end of the day, Stasis pretty much feels like it is in the exact same spot it was in before. So what did these changes actually do? Let's get back to those pinned ideas from earlier. Frost Armor is a new self-buff keyword, Shatter Damage was increased, and some select abilities saw some pretty big gameplay feel buffs. What these all have in common is one thing, and it's not Stasis. All of these are now also components of the Prismatic subclass. Yep, I'm going out on a limb and saying all of the Stasis changes were made to improve the feel of using Stasis on a Prismatic subclass. It sounds crazy at first, but hear me out. There are a number of prismatic effects that interact with the subclass keywords. The easiest example is Facet of Purpose, which grants a subclass buff based on your super when picking up an Orb of Power. Solar gives Restoration, Void gives Overshield, etc. There is a single subclass that did not have a specific self buff, Stasis. To make Stasis behave properly with this fragment and other effects, Bungie needed to add a subclass buff keyword. So they replaced the generic damage resist Stasis provided with Frost Armor. Problem solved. Without Frost Armor, Taking a Stasis super on Prismatic would have potentially harmed the feel of using the subclass, and would drive people away from using Stasis supers on it most likely. Shatter Damage is another one. It's true that the Shatter Damage enhanced the mono Stasis ad clear potential, but it also improved a number of offensive capabilities of Prismatic. Winter Shroud and Combination Blow, Bleak Watchers, Cold Snap Grenades, Titan Barricades with Hoarfrost, and more. Without the increased Shatter Damage, these abilities would have felt weak compared to the other options also available on Prismatic, and players would probably steer away from freezing effects due to having higher potential on other options. Especially since Warlock starts with Bleak Watchers and other freezing effects, and Titan starts with Diamond Lances, Stasis abilities needed to feel powerful when using Prismatic. Speaking of Diamond Lances, this is again a case of Prismatic being a catalyst for change. I would not be surprised if Lances were ignored again if they were not to be included on Prismatic Titan. Historically, Diamond Lances were always kind of forgotten about, except maybe for when Cadmus Ridge Lance Cap was released. Shiver Strike, Prismatic Titan. Winter Shroud, yep, it's on the Prismatic Hunter. Surprisingly, Bleak Watchers were untouched, but they already performed pretty well, so I'm not too shocked at this one. Basically, every ability that was underperforming, but was going to be present on Prismatic, was updated or buffed. For Mono Stasis, once these changes were added, Bungie also needed to make changes to Fragments in order to better fit with the new keywords and buffs required by Prismatic. This in itself isn't a problem, but what makes me sad is that instead of really using Prismatic as a catalyst to make Stasis better than ever before, they only focused on the Prismatic side of the kit, while leaving the true issues with Stasis remaining in place. Mono Stasis is still lacking sustain, and honestly, its ad clear potential isn't improved dramatically enough to push it into a more offensive place either. It's still the awkward middle child that is outperformed by pretty much everything across the board, especially Prismatic. Why use Mono Stasis when you can get all the benefits of the Stasis kit while simultaneously bolstering it with the sustainability and damage from the other subclasses? I think the direction of the changes to Stasis were good, but Bungie needs to take them much further to actually correct the problems with the kit to make it a compelling enough option to take over other subclasses. Shatter Skating itself isn't enough to keep me playing Stasis, probably. So, what do you think? Is Stasis better than before? Is it worse? Maybe you think it's exactly the same. Let me know your thoughts on Stasis in the comment section down below, or over in my Discord server, linked in the video description. And if you like the video and want to see more, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like on the video. We'll be talking more about the meta of the final shape very soon, and you won't want to miss those videos when they drop. But I think that's all I've got for now. As always, I've been Rizeki, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.